The New Way, Episode 7, Abolish the Fed. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, and it had two mandates. Number one, keep prices stable. Number two, maintain maximum employment. Unfortunately, the Federal Reserve has failed at both of these mandates, and as such, it's time for the Fed to be abolished. The first objective of the Fed was to keep prices stable, but unfortunately, prices have remained anything but stable since 1913. You can see that since the Fed's creation in 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its purchasing power. So in other words, if you take a $1 bill from your purse or billfold or $1 in your bank account, that dollar is only worth about 5 cents compared to $1 from 1913. So in just over 100 years, the dollar has lost over 95% of its purchasing power. Now, this is mainly due to inflation, because the private banks of the Federal Reserve can essentially create money out of nothing, out of thin air. And as they have continued to do this over time, the amount of money in the system dilutes the value of every single dollar that you have. And that's why over time we've seen prices for items like food and housing skyrocket. An example of this would be food. On the left, we have a McDonald's menu from the 1990s. On the right, we have essentially the same menu from current times. And look at the price differential. In the 90s, a Big Mac meal and a Quarter Pounder with cheese meal were $2.99. But in current times, those same meals are priced at $10.89. In the 90s, a double Quarter Pounder with cheese meal cost you $3.99. These days, that same meal is an astounding $12.19. And we see similar price increases for food at the grocery store. We see similar price increases for other commodities such as housing and education. Why is this happening? Because the dollar simply isn't worth as much as it used to be. Now, an argument that the Fed uses to counter this runaway inflation is to say, well, yes, prices are much higher, but the U.S. enjoys a far superior standard of living compared to everyone else. And looking around, we can certainly point out that that appears to be true. But when you peek behind the veil, you see how that standard of living has been achieved. And more importantly, you see that it is all based on a lie, because the U.S. standard of living is based almost entirely on debt. When prices go up and people cannot afford to buy things, they tend to use credit to purchase those commodities. Commodities such as housing, education, automobiles, and everyday purchases. And we see how bad things have gotten by the extreme levels of debt in America right now. For example, current student loan debt in America is $1.7 trillion. Auto loans, $1.6 trillion. Credit card debt, $1.2 trillion. And total household debt in America, over $18 trillion. Why is there so much debt? Because people cannot afford to purchase everyday items anymore. Prices are out of control. The only way most people can survive is to pay by credit. And when you do that, you tend to rack up a lot of debt. But unfortunately, the country as a whole is running out of credit. We are surpassing all of our debt limits. And the culprit for all of this is the Federal Reserve and their inflationary policies. Now, the second mandate of the Federal Reserve was to maintain maximum employment. But unfortunately, the Fed has failed at this completely as well. At the time of this video, the Federal Reserve states that unemployment in America is sitting at about 4.2%. Unfortunately, the Fed uses a lot of smoke and mirrors to get to that 4.2%. For example, they exclude everybody who is discouraged at the moment from looking for work. In other words, someone who has been submitting resumes and going on interviews for months on end who cannot get a job and who stops applying for a brief time no longer is counted as unemployed, according to the Federal Reserve. As such, their statistics cannot be trusted. So instead of using the Federal Reserve stats for unemployment, I have switched to the Ludwig Institute, and you'll find a very interesting figure coming out of that organization. Because Ludwig estimates that the true rate of unemployment in America is hovering at about 24% right now. And I'll put a link in the description box to their data so you can see how they arrived at that figure. But I can say from experience that speaking to people on the street, just getting out and talking to people, the 4.2% unemployment claim is a complete joke. It is a farce. And based on what I'm seeing in the real world, that 24% claim looks a lot more realistic. So we see that the Federal Reserve has failed at its two main missions, its two core functions. Number one, to keep prices stable, and number two, to maintain full employment. As such, it is time for a new system. It is time to abolish the Fed and replace it with a true dollar, a real dollar, a dollar that is actually issued and maintained by the United States government and not by a bunch of private banks. And because this new dollar will be at least partially backed by real tangible commodities, you'll see the purchasing power of the new dollar remain strong. Along with the issuance of this new dollar, we also need a jubilee in America. In other words, we need total debt forgiveness. So when this new dollar is issued, all debts, public and private, are forgiven, which will go a long way towards restoring a healthy economy for the United States. And additionally, this new dollar will be available in cash for at least 50 years. I know a lot of people are concerned about a new currency being featured as digital only and all the potential issues involving control related to that. Well, the good news is the new dollar will feature cash options available for at least 50 years. And cash will be required to be accepted at the vast majority of businesses across North America. That would include grocery stores, banks, auto dealerships, etc., etc. So as we can see, the Federal Reserve has hit the end of its road. The purchasing power of the dollar has been thoroughly destroyed. As a result of this and the Fed's inflationary policies, U.S. household debt is out of control, sitting at over $18 trillion. The Federal Reserve has also failed to maintain full employment because we're sitting at a real unemployment rate of about 20 to 25%. So the Federal Reserve has failed to meet its two objectives. It must be replaced. And that replacement should be a new dollar issued directly by the national government with a cash guarantee of at least 50 years. And equally as important, this new dollar arrives right at the same time as a debt jubilee for all Americans. If these ideas are intriguing to you or interesting to you, then consider checking out The New Way on Amazon.com. The New Way discusses how we can improve life in America for the American people, namely by restructuring our current federal government into something better, stronger, and smarter, and into a system that is more fair for all Americans. So please do check out The New Way on Amazon.com. This is Kevin Newsom saying God bless each and every one of you, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.